All right, it's time with OTAs officially underway to wrap up this 53-man roster check-in for the 49ers. It's a 90-man roster right now, but obviously they have to cut down to 53 by the time this entire offseason process is finished. So we did offense a few days ago. We're going to take a look at the defense today. Spreadsheet is up and running. It has been for a few years already. I'm copying and pasting this link. I am tossing it into the chat section so you can go ahead and follow along with me. There it is. Go to the chat section, click on that Google Doc link, and you could see the living, breathing spreadsheet for yourself. Answering a question, yes, the Ravens did sign Josh Johnson. That means that there are 4 2022 49ers who are still free agents. Robbie Gould headlines the list. Jason Verrett, not sure if he's going to continue playing. Haven't received word on him in a long time since that injury. Dante Johnson and Jordan Matthews. But Josh Johnson is now a Baltimore Raven. Anyway, back to the spreadsheet. This is the 49ers defense 53-man roster projection. We're going to go through this position group by position group so we could even scroll down so that the defense is prominent on the screen, and we can start talking about the 49ers defensive line. The defensive line can be found right here. I'll highlight it. A lot of bodies for the 49ers. I'm counting right now. That is 15 players on the 90-man roster are defensive linemen. How many will make the 53? Well, in the past, the 49ers have taken 10. They've also taken 9 last season on the initial 53-man. So right now, I have 10 making the 49ers roster, but that number is fungible. The big question for me along the front line is, has Drake Jackson strengthened into a fixture? Because look at this. You have Bosa at one of the end positions, Eric Armstead at tackle, Javon Hargrave at tackle. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a little bit. And then that fourth man, that's going to be the difference, in my opinion, between a completely transcendent defensive line and a merely very good one. The 49ers, I think, can be historically good this season if they get production opposite Nick Bosa, because we know that Armstead's a dog. We know Javon Hargrave is a dog. The question is, can Drake Jackson fill out that spot as the fourth dog along the defensive line? And to do that, he's going to have to become stronger than he was last year, like literally physically stronger. Now, the most recent speculation, or even I would say it's a report because it came straight from the 49ers, is that Drake Jackson has put on muscle. That's important because last year he had 3.5 sacks over the first 5 or 6 games and then nothing after that. Had that nice interception off of the deflection against the Raiders. But the issue with Drake last year was that at USC, he had played a maximum of 11 games in a single season. The 49ers played 20. This is really nothing against Drake specifically because NFL rookies do often run into walls because the NFL season's so long and you've got to be stronger for the NFL level than college. And Drake Jackson wasn't quite strong enough to last that whole season as a dependable force against the run, and you have to earn your right to rush the passer. So the 49ers couldn't play him as much later in the year. You saw him inactive down the stretch. So Jackson has been tasked with getting bigger and stronger. He's already fast enough. He's already bendy enough, but it's about that physical man strength. Remember, he's only 21 years old and he's been around the facility all off season. 49ers are impressed with the progress that he's been making, but for him to assume this spot right here on a more full-time role like the 49ers need, well, Drake Jackson has to carry that over into actual 11-on-11 play. So that's the big question along the defensive line. Other options, Robert Beal Jr., but he's going to be more of a pass rushing specialist. He's a lighter edge rusher, 247 pounds. You have Clelin Ferrell, who, if Drake Jackson doesn't yet have that consistent man strength that the 49ers need, Farrell's somebody who does, who can give the 49ers good run defense at that defensive end position, but not as much pass rushing upside. Then you have some of your veteran signings that they brought in this offseason. Austin Bryant, Farrell is one of the veteran signings, by the way. Austin Bryant is another one of those veteran signings. Originally with the Detroit Lions, played college ball with Clelin Ferrell, maybe Austin Bryant, who has had some injury issues over the course of his first 3 years in the NFL, can be a player who the 49ers plug into that defensive end rotation. Spencer Wagee is a undrafted free agent out of North Dakota State, former college teammate with Trey Lance, now reunited with Trey Lance. Anyway, that is the defensive end position. A lot of it is reliant on what Drake Jackson can bring the 49ers. The good news for the D-end position, opposite Nick Bosa, is that it should be propped up by both Bosa and the 49ers set up on the interior. So just these spots that I've highlighted. Armstead and Hargrave, obviously the frontliners. That was a weakness last year. They didn't have Hargrave, and Armstead was hurt. He had the plantar fasciitis in his foot. So, and Javon Kinlaw was hurt for most of the season as well. So the 49ers really were thin at defensive tackle. Kevin Gibbons was probably their best player there. Kalia Davis was on the NFI list, so he didn't play. Kerry Hyder had to play a lot of snaps on the inside, even though I think he's probably better at defensive end, but I have him slotted as a defensive tackle just because that's where the 49ers will see most utility from him. T.Y. McGill, who I don't even have making the 53-man roster in this first projection, saw some important snaps for the 49ers. So you can tell that it's been completely transformed by the addition of Javon Hargrave, the best defensive free agent available this past cycle. And it should be even further transformed by more health from Eric Armstead, although you can't count on that as a given. You'd hope that Eric Armstead isn't bothered by the foot injuries this season, that he's fully recovered from them. So you've got Armstead and Hargrave on the inside. That creates a really, really ferocious tandem. And what it does is it allows Javon Kinlaw to be a second string player. And that takes pressure off of Javon Kinlaw and his knee. Kinlaw and Givens, that's a hell of a second unit at defensive tackle for the 49ers. That's really good. And then you look at Kalia Davis, essentially treat this as a rookie season, right, for Kalia Davis, because he did not play last year. Got to practice, finished the year out with momentum coming off the NFI list. He wasn't officially activated from it, but they opened up his 3-week practice window. And, you know, Kalia Davis is such an intriguing prospect, especially one to give free runway, right? There's not pressure on him to step in and be a stalwart right away. But you look at his history, he was a stack linebacker. He wasn't an outside linebacker in college. He was a stack linebacker. So this guy can move. Explosiveness they've compared to DJ Jones. That's, you know, Chris Kasarik told me, I don't think that I've ever seen a stack linebacker convert to defensive tackle at the effectiveness that Kalia Davis was able to do at Central Florida. So you've got somebody that can really, really move on the inside. And it could be a nice specialty piece for the 49ers in passing situations to further bolster that depth beyond Hargrave, beyond Armstead, beyond Javon Kinlaw, beyond Kevin Gibbons. We'll see what Kalia Davis can do. But I'm treating him as a rookie as far as my evaluation goes, because he, you know, last year, most of it was on that NFI list. I still remember he was catching bombs from Jimmy Garoppolo last year during training camp. They're just sitting there. Jimmy Garoppolo was on the side field, right? He wasn't practicing with the 49ers. He was still finishing up some of his rehab. 49ers were looking for that trade that obviously never happened. So Jimmy was a little lonely on that side field. And one day, Kalia Davis, who obviously wasn't practicing either because he'd be on the NFI list for the 49ers, Kalia Davis, the defensive tackle, shows up and starts running like streak patterns. And Jimmy Garoppolo's lofting the ball up there. And I think they ran like 4 or 5 of them. And I never see the defensive tackle catching bombs. It was really, really cool. That should give you an idea of how athletic Kalia Davis is. So we'll see if he fits into the 49ers. We'll see if he fits into the 49ers structure this coming season. Sorry about that. That sometimes I'll just like X out of the screen and it's extremely embarrassing. Don't want that to happen again. So all good. Mike is working again. We're talking about Kalia Davis. We're talking about the night and day difference with the 49ers interior defensive line. I have to reshare the screen of the depth chart. There we go. It's back after I accidentally X'd out of my stream. Okay, so that's the defensive line. My question is this the best defensive line as far as frontline power plus depth that Chris Kasarik has ever had with the 49ers? It's certainly a possibility. You know, I thought that frontline depth alone, 2019, obviously with D Ford, still takes the cake. And Drake Jackson's really going to have to prove himself, or somebody like Robert Beal is really going to have to prove himself for the 49ers to be in the same ballpark as far as, and they had DeForest Buckner too, but now they have Hargrave to replace him. But they still have work to do to show that along the front line, they're better than 2019 or as good as 2019. But when you look at the depth and the totality of the group, remember 2019 did have some depth issues. That's why they started leaking oil toward the end of the season. So you look at the totality of this. When you add Farrell, when you add Gibbons, when Kinlaw is a depth piece, Robert Beal, I mean, there's a high upside here, but there's also a lower downside just because he wasn't the most consistent producer in college. But boy, does he have talent. You look at all of these bodies and the fact that players like Kalia Davis and Hyder are in the depth 2 column. And Marlon Davidson, a second-round pick a few years ago for the Falcons, I don't even have him making the 53-man roster. I mean, this could be a really, really deep defensive line for Chris Kaserik on top of an impressive front line. So far, it's not a fabulous 4 yet. Drake Jackson has to insert himself into that discussion. But Bosa, Armstead, Hargrave, all studs. This is a real chance for the 49ers defensive line to make some special splashes this season. And they've invested so much in it, both from the draft capital standpoint and then money. I mean, they went out. Remember free agency, we were saying, hey, the weakness of this defensive line is defensive tackle. Are the 49ers going to go out and spend on a DT? And people were talking about, yes, they were saying, yeah, this is something the 49ers need to do. But I think that most people, myself included, we thought, oh, Javon Hargrave, that's going to be outside of the 49ers' ambitions just because he's going to be so expensive and the 49ers, might want to restrain themselves a little bit. But no, first day of free agency, they go out and they sign Javon Hargrave. They signed the biggest fish on the market. They land him, and that showed the 49ers' commitment to making this defensive line supersonic. Let's put it that way. They want to turbocharge this unit, and they have the personnel to potentially do that, but there still is some question along the edge. Now, because of that question along the edge, do they sign one of the available edge rushers? Yannick Ngakoue is still out there. I've talked about that. Robert Quinn, those kind of players. Or you go for a more budget option like Justin Houston. And to that I say, yeah, but there's no rush. Nobody else is signing those guys right now. I think those guys are just kind of holding out throughout this offseason to see if maybe there's an opportunity at training camp. Maybe they think they can have a little bit more leverage. I think teams are thinking they'll have a little bit more leverage as the season approaches. So the 49ers have some cap space now. They've opened it up with the Christian McCaffrey restructure. Remember that signings now no longer count against the compensatory formula. So the 49ers wouldn't lose any draft pick value by signing a free agent now. And if they, go into training camp and they see that Drake Jackson's really strong, looking really good, they'll probably say, we got real leverage here. Yeah, Yannick, if you want to come along, sign with us if you want to win a title, but we're only going to offer you $1 million or $2 million, right? I'm just giving you an illustration. I'm sure they would offer him a little bit more than that. But the point of leverage is if Drake Jackson isn't looking good, if the 49ers are still concerned about his strength and they really need another body, well, that's when somebody like Yannick Ngakoue could be like, okay, well, give me more money. And the league knows what's going on in these buildings. Agents know, they hear from their contacts. I have agents text me all the time saying, hey, how's so-and-so looking at 49ers camp? So there's always a knowledge of where a team stands as far as strength at a particular position goes. And I think the 49ers and the potential signing of another veteran defensive end is going to be very reliant on how that position is developing throughout the course of this offseason, because that's going to dictate price. It's going to dictate 49ers need level, and that is very highly correlated to price. They do have the benefit of being a true contender. They do have the benefit of having Chris Kaserik and a tremendous supporting cast. So if somebody wants to sign for a year and be in an environment where they can put up really good tape because of the coaching and the supporting cast, the 49ers can offer that, I think, at a level that is more attractive than any other team, which is more conducive to a potential good price, right? A player is going to be willing to play at a relative discount. It's much more likely, at least, that he's going to be willing to play at a relative discount in those situations than for a terrible team that is going to make it hard for him to shine on tape. Okay. Anyway, we just talked about the 49ers defensive line. That group looks solid. Why don't we move on to the linebacker trio? And this is just the starting trio. We can also look at the entire room of linebackers. I'll highlight them right here. Battle of the youth to replace Azeez Al-Shire. As you can see along the front line, it's Warner, Greenlaw, and right now I have Oren Burke slotted in there. But I think that some of these rookies might make a really, really strong push for that third linebacker spot that belonged to Azeez, but Azeez is now gone. They did not re-sign him, but they turned to the draft and to undrafted free agency to bring in some prospects who are potential third linebackers. I have D. Winters, the 6th-round pick, making the team on my 53, but boy, this can be a toss-up. Don't forget Marcelino McCrary-Ball. He was an undrafted free agent last year who impressed the 49ers on the practice squad. They brought him back, so he's going to have a shot at that third linebacker spot. And Jalen Graham, who the 49ers don't consider him to be much lower on the pecking order than D. Winters. They were deciding between drafting Winters and Graham in the 6th round. They ultimately drafted Winters out of TCU, but then Graham was still available in the 7th, so they used their final pick on Jalen Graham. Two different types of linebackers, I should say. In D. Winters, you've got a smaller guy. He's speedier. He's got a 4.4 40. I mean, a tremendous blitzer, but he can generate pressure, and he did this at TCU without dedicated blitz calls. In fact, you watch the tape from TCU, and for D. Winters, it was 7.5 sacks and 14.5 tackles for loss, which is a lot last year. And he is shooting the gap consistently to the point where you're like, oh boy, TCU is dialing up good blitz calls with this guy, and this guy knows how to execute them. So I asked him about that, and he's like, well, I actually wasn't blitzing. It looks like I was blitzing, but D. Winters are just so good at anticipating what opposing offenses were doing, and he paired that anticipation with 4.4 speed. He was so good at that it looked like he was blitzing. And I think that blew the 49ers socks off. That's why they wanted this guy on their football team. They like the speedy linebackers. Now, the question will be, when he's playing mano a mano against the run, when he's not shooting the gap, when he has to like take on either, offensive linemen or running backs, when he has to fight his way through some blocks, is that lack of size, he's around 220, maybe even a little bit less, is that lack of size going to be an issue? And that's where D. Winters has to get better. But the 49ers are tremendously thankful that they have another player who can be that specialty third linebacker, who can get after the QB, get after running backs, with his anticipation, with his speed, because obviously speed is correlated with the ability to cover. So he's the first and leading candidate in the battle of youth, being the highest draft pick for the 49ers. But we know that Marcelino McCrary-Ball is speedy as well. And then you look at Jalen Graham, the 7th-round pick. Do not discount this guy's length. Jalen Graham, he's tall. He's like Fred Warner. I mean, the size on Jalen Graham is reminiscent of Fred Warner. So is the 40 time at 4.6. Compared to 4.4 for D. Winters, it's slower, but that is by no means slow for the linebacker position. And the 49ers R&D department had Jalen Graham playing fast. He played a position at Purdue called the star, which is a lot like the position that Fred Warner played at BYU. It's like a glorified defensive back who's playing closer to the line of scrimmage, so he also gets some linebacker duties. But Jalen Graham, when you look at his pass breakup abilities, when you look at his ability to track opposing receiving targets, you'll look at him and you'll be like, ooh, can they develop him into a Fred Warner mold? So don't discount Jalen Graham either. When you see this, I mean, Oren Burks, gives the 49ers a nice floor at linebacker. Warner and Greenlaw are total studs. We know this already, right? But Oren Burks is a special teams guy, but he's a veteran, and they're not going to be terrible at that third linebacker spot if he has to play before some of these rookies are ready. Same thing with Demetrius Flanagan-Foles. Special teams guy, can give you snaps in a pinch at that third linebacker spot. They also picked up Mariano Sari-Marin out of Minnesota. He's more of a future developmental prospect at Mike linebacker. You always need to make sure that that spot has somebody in the pipeline, the radio in the helmet, right? Fred Warner is going to be a long-term fixture with this team, but always necessary to be working on a Mike linebacker developmental project. And then there's Curtis Robinson, Stanford product that they brought back. He is a trusted agent on special teams. I think in summary, when you look at this linebacker position for the 49ers, it's clearly the best in football at the very top between Warner and Greenlaw. There was a little bit of a debate heading into last year. Is it the 49ers linebacking core or is it Tampa Bay's? I think there is no more debate. It is the 49ers linebacking core. I mean, you look at Steve Wilks, the 49ers defensive coordinator, and this was my big piece that I wrote last week. Steve Wilks is talking about blitzing more. Steve Wilks is talking about being more multiple on the back end in terms of coverages. And every single time that he discusses those possibilities, he mentions the 49ers linebackers. He mentions Warner and he mentions Greenlaw. And obviously they drafted more speed and D. Winters and Jalen Graham. He's talking about adaptability on the second level. If those linebackers can play the run, but if they can also flex out and cover backs coming out of the backfield, if they can cover tight ends on pass routes, and if they can even match up against slot receivers occasionally, and don't laugh, remember what Fred Warner did to CeeDee Lamb last year against the Cowboys on that one play in the seam. I mean, he was completely blanketing him. That is a luxury. And if your linebackers can do that, you can take chances elsewhere on the defensive formation. You can blitz more. You can mix up the coverages in a way that try to confuse the quarterback more so you generate more turnovers. I mean, the 49ers had the most interceptions in the NFL last season. So for Steve Wilks, it all starts, and that's not Steve Wilks. Sorry, I have the wrong. No, I do have Steve Wilks open. Good. For some reason, I have a different window than I thought open, but Wilks is up on the screen. Yeah, here it is. Good. Inside Steve Wilks' crash course on the 49ers defense and the history behind it, you look at Steve Wilks and the way that he is assimilating, integrating with the 49ers system. He can take this defense and add his own flair to it, right? Add his own philosophies to it. Try to keep the 49ers defense ahead of the adjustments that opposing offensive coordinators will make. And I think so much of that is very clearly rooted in the 49ers' strength at linebacker, because I do believe that is the best linebacker core in the league. Now, it's going to be up to the depth, the young guys, the battle of the youth to ensure that it stays that way, right? You can never rest in the NFL. You constantly have to be moving forward with that plan. You cannot just sit there and say, we're good with Warner, we're good with Dre Greenlaw. Stuff changes quickly in the NFL, the not for long league, right? That's what it stands for. And that's what the 49ers, I think, have in mind. And that's what they had in mind when they drafted 2 linebackers just this last month. Okay, let's move on back to the depth chart. Oh, I promised I would actually answer questions about each position group. So if we got a good D-line question and we have a good linebacker question, I will answer them before we move on to safeties and finally cornerbacks. I'm looking for linebacker and defensive line questions. I'm scrolling up here just because I want to do this the same way, the consistency between the offensive video and the one here on defense. Well, since I'm waiting for questions, I'll put this up. I like it when Dave cruises hotspots around town, wherever he's at. Thank you, man. Today, we're going to go to some cool spots. I think I'm going to go to Stanford. My buddy Leo is joining for lunch at Fambrini's. That's going to be good. Say hi if you're there. And I think San Francisco a little bit later today. I always have to swim in the Bay. Because tomorrow is OTAs, and then I fly to Chicago right after practice. So Chicago should be cool. Is there any place in Chicago I should do breakfast/lunch at? I don't have much time there, but breakfast/lunch in Chicago on Wednesday. Let me know. All right. I want some question right here. Good. You can always count on Mike to come through if nobody else is with good questions. Any concern with the 49ers edge if a major injury happens to Bosa? Of course. I mean, if you lose Bosa, then you lose the best defensive player in football. So there would be a lot of concern if that happened. So we saw it happen in 2020, and it hurt the 49ers defense significantly. You look at Bosa. If you didn't have Bosa, if you erased Bosa, which I just did from the depth chart, don't worry, I'll put him back there. Who slides into that spot? Well, probably Cleveland Farrell right now. That's a big downgrade, right? Would put even more pressure on Drake Jackson, Robert Beal. Kerry Hyder would probably move back to the edge, just like where he was in 2020 at 8.5 sacks. So it'd be tough for the 49ers. Bosa is going to get paid this offseason, and he's going to get paid because of how valuable he is to the 49ers. All right, here is a linebacker question. Tobias says, I can see the Demetrius Flanagan Foles being cut. What do you think, David? Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have this much youthful depth at linebacker, he's a bubble guy. I mean, Warner, Greenlaw, Burke's going to make the team. You can never guarantee that a late round draft pick is going to make the team. So I see winners on here, but say that both winners and Jalen Graham really impressed the 49ers and Marcelino McCrary-Ball. Maybe they want to take 6 linebackers. Who knows? The first guy that would get pushed out is Demetrius Flanagan Foles. I just typically like to wait to see a rookie or rookies prove themselves before removing a veteran from the 53-man roster. So that's why I have it set up the way that it is right now. Flanagan Foles on the team, Winters on the team, and now Graham, Marcelino McCrary-Ball, those kind of guys, they have to prove themselves. All right, thanks for the great questions. Now we can move on. We can move on to safety. Ji'Ayir Brown's the 49ers' top draft pick this year, number 87. Kyle Shanahan has already talked about the 49ers using 3 safety sets to get him onto the field early. They obviously like Talanoa Hufanga. It's Hufanga and Brown, the future tandem that they're envisioning. But Deshaun Gibson was damn good last season. He's under a 1-year contract. Again, now he's 33 years old, or he will be for this football season. So you don't want to take Gibson off the field because of how good he was alongside Hufanga. And obviously Hufanga's an all-pro. So how do you mix in Ji'Ayir Brown? Well, Kyle Shanahan said that you do it through 3 safety sets. So what will those look like? Because that's going to go back to Steve Wilks, right? Steve Wilks and his creativity is going to be very important when it comes to mixing in the 49ers top draft pick from this season. So here you see the safety position. It's highlighted. The 49ers have Hufanga, Gibson up top. Ji'Ayir Brown, highlighted in yellow as a rookie, is that third safety. Now, last season, Jimmy Ward got hurt before the year even started, and the 49ers had to go out shopping, and that's when Deshaun Gibson came in. So it's totally possible that they don't even need to run 3 safety sets to get Ji'Ayir Brown on the field. It was really important to bring in a safety for future developmental purposes and also for the now. And that's who Ji'Ayir Brown is. Only player in this draft class who had 10 interceptions in college football over the course of the past 2 seasons. There's George Odom. Odom is a lot like Oren Burks. He's a specialist, right? I mean, led the league in special teams tackles last year. He can play safety in a pinch, but you'd rather have him as that 4th safety as depth. And then this is going to be really interesting to me. Miles Hartsfield, they brought him in from Carolina because Steve Wilks really wanted a coach on the field type who knows his system, who, helps establish the system for the 49ers. That's exactly who Hartsfield is. He knows what the coach wants, knows what the coordinator wants. He's speedy, not a great player, but somebody who I can see making the roster or at least the practice squad. I have him on the outside looking in on the 53 right now, but just his knowledge of what Wilks wants is going to be invaluable for at least the offseason program and training camp. Taylor Hawkins was on the practice squad last year out of San Diego State. We'll see if he can make another developmental stride. Same thing with Quantrez Knight, versatile defensive back, athletic guy, wore multiple different hats for UCLA in college a couple years ago. 49ers liked him enough in the practice squad to bring him back. Then there is the new guy, the undrafted free agent, Avery Young. So safety, to me, looks like the 49ers have a solid plan. They're passing the torch from Deshaun Gibson over to Ji'Ayir Brown, but that torch passing doesn't have to be imminent. It could be something that happens gradually with 3 safety sets. I think, just as important is the tracking of Talanoa Hufanga. Can he continue to add to his repertoire, accentuate his strengths, and minimize his weaknesses? Thought he did a good job of that last year. There were some struggles, right? Against some of those play action passes. He was biting a little bit too aggressively. I think that he got better as the postseason came along. So Hufanga has to continue to accentuate those strengths, which are missile-like play speed, because he's got great anticipation. And he could be somebody that sets a nice model for Ji'Ayir Brown, because Ji'Ayir Brown and Talanoa Hufanga, their profiles are extremely similar. Their 40 times are within 1/100th of a second of each other. They're in the 4.6 range. I think one of them's 4.64 and one of them was 4.65. So neither guy tested well in the 40, but both of them you put on the tape and both of them are missiles near the line of scrimmage. Both of them seem to be in the right place at the right time to generate takeaways. I said 10 picks for Ji'Ayir Brown. Hufanga already a handful of picks for the 49ers last season. Remember the Jaquiski Tart? I mean, interceptions were hard to come by for Jaquiski Tart. So it's a skill to be in the right place at the right time. Hufanga more picks last year than Jaquiski Tart over several seasons with the 49ers. Ji'Ayir Brown brings a similar resume out of college, right place, right time. So you want, when you're looking at Talanoa Hufanga taking the next step, you not only want him to eliminate some of the over aggressiveness that what was the biggest problem for him as a rookie, but you also want him to show Ji'Ayir Brown the way, because that's going to be your future at the safety position. It's going to be a duo. It's going to be a tandem of Talanoa Hufanga and Ji'Ayir Brown. All right, on the cornerback. Oh, wait, safety questions. Safety questions. You guys have any? Scrolling down. All right, here's one. Do you think Hufanga makes those strides since Wilkes' background is in DBs and might be even in more position to work with Hufanga on what he needs to work on? Yes. Now, Steve Wilkes, he's going to specialize with the corners, right? So Daniel Bullock's safeties coach, still going to work with the safeties. Wilkes has come in, essentially replaces Corey Undlin when it comes to what the 49ers do during practice. Undlin left to Houston under D'Amico Ryans. Well, it's going to be Wilkes working specifically with the corners, but Wilkes is a DB-oriented defensive coordinator. So it's not like he won't be instructing Talanoa Hufanga. I absolutely think that the hiring of Wilkes can be good for Talanoa. Corey asks, if the 49ers use more three safety sets, do they leave out the nickel back or the third linebacker in favor of Brown? It just depends on what teams are running, right? So if you look at, we're going to talk about nickel back in a second, but if you look at pass situations, Isaiah Oliver probably stays on the field, and that third safety can give you just greater coverage capability. If you look at run situations, well, maybe you want to keep that third linebacker on the field, whoever it is, Jalen Graham, D. Winters, Marcelino McCray-Ball, Oren Burks. Maybe you want to keep that player on the field and replace Isaiah Oliver. But Isaiah Oliver also has been good in run support. So it's a pick your poison kind of thing. The 49ers have a lot of good poison to really scuttle opposing offenses. Two good questions. Thank you. Why don't we move on to cornerback? It's a question of depth and not frontline strength. So I'll highlight the corner position here, and I'll include nickel back in that equation. There you go. So when I talk about it's a question of depth, well, look at the frontliners. Ward, Charvarius, Diomeder Lenore, Isaiah Oliver. That's a nice front line. I think the 49ers can be better at nickelback this season than they were last year, because Jimmy Ward was impressive to me, the way that he picked up that position. But remember, it was a new position for Jimmy Ward. Isaiah Oliver, he started his career in the NFL as an outside guy, but Atlanta realized this guy's better on the inside. Doesn't have blazing speed. Put him on the inside. He's a good blitzer, has a good nose for the football. The short area quickness is better than the straight line speed. And Isaiah Oliver starred, I thought, late in the season last year for Atlanta. So I think the 49ers might have gotten better at nickel. They got way better at corner over the course of last year because Diomeder Lenore improved. Diomeder Lenore wasn't very good early in the season, and then he improved. So, oh boy, we got some news here. 1 second. Mike is sending me a few messages. The NFL bylaw on allowing a third QB to be active without burning a roster spot was approved. Huge for the 49ers, because that means they can carry Purdy, Lance, and Darnold on the team at the same time. So that's I have to make another video about that. Why don't we wrap up this cornerback video and we'll talk about that by law in just a second. Anyway, when you look at cornerback depth, the 49ers are in a spot where I'm just not sure, right? I'm not sure about Ambry Thomas. I'm not sure about A.J. Parker, Trey Swilling. Those are more developmental guys. Hell, I'm not sure about Samuel Womack. I think that he did a lot of good things last year, especially on special teams, but he's got to get better. And Darrell Luter Jr., he's a rookie, 5th rounder, has a lot of potential, inside-out versatility, but these guys have to showcase that in the NFL. One intriguing guy is Deshaun Jamison, the undrafted free agent out of Texas. They gave him the biggest guarantee out of all the undrafted free agents, higher than even Joey Fisher, something like $120,000. Jamison's frame probably better built for nickelback, but who knows? Maybe he forces his way onto the roster because he's an electric returner. You put on his tape and you're like, whoa, this guy can really move. And then he could play outside or inside. Really, you cannot count out the undrafted free agents. The draft doesn't matter anymore. It's all a meritocracy, and these guys are going to try to develop over the course of the next few months. They can make that 53-man roster. All right, time to talk about that quarterback rule. So I'm going to go ahead, sign off, send off a couple tweets, and be back live here in a few minutes. Why don't you all stay tuned for that? Hit the notification icon, hit the follow button so you can be aboard for another video. Everybody, hope you enjoyed this defensive depth chart, 49ers 53-man roster projection. More of this coming before OTAs on Tuesday. Everybody, bye for just a few minutes.